If you've ever thought about growing hops and you've done a preliminary internet search, you'll see very quickly that they're kind of a big animal and they require a lot of space. You'll see them growing up trellises or up poles, or in my case in Montana, I have them growing up chicken wire on a pole on a fence side. And that can be kind of intimidating if you're not necessarily permanent or you live in an apartment and you just don't want to commit to laying something down in your land. So the purpose of this video is to show you how to kind of get away with growing them in a mobile solution. This is a sub-irrigated planter, and this is what I'll show you how to build. What is a sub-irrigated planter, or SIP for short? It's basically a kind of a build that you do, and water circumvents the grow medium, collects in a reservoir underneath, and through capillary action, the water wicks its way up, and the plants meet it in the middle. Two of the big advantages of this are, versus traditional soil watering, you lose a lot via evaporation. And since the water goes underneath the grow medium and isn't subjected to evaporation, you'll use about 90% less. And as well as control. So, for example, in Montana we have very rocky soil and it's not necessarily conducive to growing a lot of things. Since you're setting up an environment, in this case 75 liters or 20 gallons, you're setting up the perfect environment for these vegetables or these hops to grow. Also, quite portable. 75 liters or 20 gallons, with the medium that I use, it's probably in the vicinity of 50 pounds or 25 kilograms, so it's quite movable. And the watering intervals. I usually water my plants about maybe 7 to 10 days, which gives you kind of a different kind of freedom than you're used to if you have a large garden. Some things that I thought about when I designed these units each is I knew I needed 3 of them, and they cost about $50 each, so I didn't want to have too much invested in them. I went with 75 liters or 20 gallons because it was, well, what I could get here in Korea very easily, and contrary to what some I've seen on the internet, the 5-gallon bucket keeps coming up again, and you'll see people growing hops in these 5-gallon buckets, and you'll see them in the early season where they get kind of 6 feet tall, and then you don't typically hear back from them. And I kind of have a theory that the hops, they just need more space and they kind of tap out. So I went bigger rather than smaller. And the durability, whenever you kind of come up with a vessel, you need to think, is it going to be durable? The UV rays from the sun are brutal. You're looking at 3, 4, 5 years before maybe you can get consistently high yields from these hops plants. So what will these buckets or what will these troughs look like in that span of time? Hot and cold cycles. During the freeze in the winter time, when water is in there, it expands. Will whatever you've chosen to build with, will it be suitable for those conditions? I chose plastic because it was easy to work with, and again, it's what I had on hand, or I could find rather. And the portability. If you're in an apartment, if you're on the move, even if you're not in an apartment and you move cross city or cross state, you could potentially bring these with you. You could use a dolly to lift them if you couldn't lift them yourself, and most importantly, in my situation, would it fit through doorways? And lastly, is it food safe? So this is where I came up with using the Brute bucket. The sub-irrigated planter in a hole, this is what the schematic looks like. And again, sub, you're watering here, it bypasses the grow medium, and it collects in a reservoir down here. This little hole here is an overflow, which means you can never overwater the plants. And here is basically where the wicking starts. This sits in the reservoir of water. You notice the holes in here that allow water to go through, and through capillary action, it meets the plant roots and they meet somewhere in the middle. Here's one in practice. This looks to be a laundry detergent bucket, maybe 5 gallons or 19 liters. Here you can see the water pipe, probably 1-inch PVC. It goes down to the bottom. Here's a false bottom, kind of keeps the water reservoir and the grow medium separated. And this thing in the center that sits and occupies both spaces is probably a potting mix packed real tight, and this allows wicking to happen. Here's another application in which it looks like the user here used a perforated drain pipe to act as a false bottom. Growing medium in between, and somewhere here would be a PVC pipe allowing you to water while bypassing the medium. If you're looking for different ways to make a sub-irrigated planter or different applications, there's a really good guy on YouTube. He goes by the moniker MHP Gardener. He's mostly growing tomatoes or things that are really water intensive. Before I designed this hop planter, I hadn't seen it in action. I hadn't seen it being grown with hops in mind. And after I've done mine and after it's been successful, I did find one person, a website called Brewbot, BREWBOT.ca, a guy in Canada growing these, and really beautiful pictures, and he looks like he has high yields, though he doesn't give you a tutorial. He went in a different direction. He used the square Rubbermaid containers. Okay, so for this build, we're going to be using a brute bucket. About 30 bucks is what I found them for in Korea, and like I mentioned, they're easy to work with. You know, if you didn't want to do this anymore, say if you weren't going to be growing hops, you could repurpose these buckets. You could fill this with a non-drilled bung or non-drilled stopper, and you could retain the original functionality of the bucket. However, we're going to build this today, and what I did is I went up about 6 inches from the bottom of the bucket, and using a 22 or 23 millimeter hole cutter, which is a 15/16 size. I chose this tool size because A, it fits the stopper well, and B, if you drill a kegerator hole, you'll need this exact same tool, so you get 2 birds, 1 stone out of that. Anyways, going 6 inches up with my false bottom and with all that material down below, 6 inches up gives me 2.5 gallons of reservoir, and that's, you know, coming back to that 7 to 10 day watering interval. I got plenty of leeway. If you were, you know, if I was to leave town or just kind of forget watering it, I wouldn't come back to a super wilty plant. In Montana during dry season, if I don't water every other day, my leaves will start to suffer and they'll start to wilt. So that's the difference between regular irrigation and having this reservoir underneath. Okay, there's the drilled stopper in there, and that's going to service as your water overflow. I would like to recommend, I don't have a picture of this, but I did put some screen with some wire over it to kind of act as a guard, because while you want the water to leave the unit if you overwater, you don't want mosquitoes coming in there in that stagnant water and laying eggs. Here's that kind of center thing where that acts as a wick. In one of the laundry, in the application where they use the laundry bucket here, it looked like they used kind of a yogurt cup. I used about a 6-inch planter here. That gave me that 6 inches of clearance, and I had to kind of think about structural integrity. This is pretty robust, so there's no rhyme or reason to where I threw the holes or the size I threw the holes in there. I would just recommend throwing as many holes in there as you can to allow water to come in and start that wicking action, but not so many that you damage the structural integrity of the planter itself, because on top of this you've got basically 60 liters or maybe even more or less grow medium sitting on top of that. It gets compacted. It's fairly heavy, like I mentioned, about 50 pounds or 25 kilograms. So this does act as a support. I threw some rocks down here. There's no reason other than I had them and I was trying to get rid of them, so don't worry about that. Here is the 6-inch planter stood up. I'm kind of eyeballing it to where I want to put the overflow. And continuation on my false bottom, I'm trying to keep the water reservoir and the wick separate, and where these kind of mate together. You'll see that. So this is just a kitchen strainer, food safe. It was like about $3 and easy to work with, and that's why I chose this material. I put a little bit more rock down here to kind of keep that down, keep that from floating. It won't, but just trying to get rid of it. Your water pipe. About this time you want to put in your water pipe, and I used 1-inch PVC. If you're planning on watering your hops with a hose, do make sure you get one with a big enough diameter where you can just kind of stick that hose in and you don't have to babysit it. Although filling up 2.5 gallons won't take that long, but it's just something to think about design-wise. Also, when you choose this pipe, this PVC or whatever you may choose, cut it on an angle. Otherwise, if it's flat and you stick it all the way to the bottom, it can choke off the water flow. It can not allow the water to bypass. But with this point here, you'll never be able to pin it to the bottom. Also, version 2.0, if I were to do it again, because I went with perlite as a false bottom material or as a filler, I would put some screen over this. Perlite, when it was dry and it mixes with water, some of it want to come back up here. Not a big deal. Okay, here, the PVC buried to the bottom. I've got the center yogurt cup / 6-inch planter packed with potting mix, and around here I've got some perlite. Just kind of, you wouldn't have to put this here if you had, say, something that would hold up the rest of the medium, but again, dealing with 60 liters of potting mix, it'll get heavy and it'll fall. Next, I threw some screen down, had it on hand. You know, you don't necessarily have to have a barrier here, but just kind of trying to separate business and pleasure. I've heard of people using cardboard, and while you might think that cardboard disintegrates pretty quickly, and I would tend to agree with you, by the time everything is shifted, they've kind of kept its, you know, it's packed down, and it won't, you know, won't kind of mix. Here I've got some t-shirt. Again, it was kind of recommended that maybe this would aid in wicking. Probably really unnecessary, but it was cleaning out the closet and just getting rid of it just the same. Here is a mixture. Here's kind of a potting mixture of cocoa peat, peat moss, bark, and perlites. This is good for wicking. Not too heavy either. So filling up the planter. Fill it up, add bucketfuls of soil, kind of shake it around, let it settle as you go. And if you did go with cotton, bring these up. Parallel to all this, I started a hops rhizome in mid-March. And so I was starting it to the side. When you got a rhizome, they're not necessarily, I mean, they're robust, but they're, you know, they don't have a big root system, so their ability to fetch water is less, and even less so in a sub-irrigated planter because, as the name implies, the water will be at the bottom, and they don't have the roots yet to necessarily fetch that water. Putting in the rhizome in its soil that it was already in, I filled it up to the line, and you know, as you can see here, it's settling. You want to bring the potting mix all the way to the top here, and there's a really good reason why. I'll tell you in a bit. So at this time you want to give it a good saturation because there is really no moisture in this soil, and these hops here, they don't have a mature root base yet, so they'll be looking for water. You do it once, that starts the capillary action, and you'll be all good once you fill this with water. So bring that potting mix all the way up to the top, and you're going to add a piece of plastic. Here's clear. If you're in a kind of a cooler temperature and you want to collect solar gain, you might go with black. Another reason to go with black is that it will kind of eliminate the light from the moisture underneath and discourage anything from growing that might ordinarily take an opportunity to grow. Over the drain pipe here, you see I've got screen again, and this is again to keep the mosquitoes out of the stagnant water underneath. As this settles, and if you get any seasonal rain, this is a prime location for water to settle because of the plastic, and that's why you want to fill it all the way up to the brim, and even in the center go a little bit higher, and that'll kind of cause a hill effect, and it'll sheet water off, and you won't have any stagnant water for mosquitoes to hang out. So this is the first year planter. I grabbed these rhizomes in mid-March, and this guy took off right away, probably a few weeks in. What did I use for fertilizer? I had some Jack's 20-20-20 on hand. I would say about once a month I hit it with fertilizer to the tune of a tablespoon per gallon. I wasn't really meticulous with the notes, but all turned out quite well. You could use some manure tea or anything else you might use in a hydroponic application. So, like I mentioned, got them in mid-March, and this is what they look like in mid-June, 3 months later. They went pretty crazy. More pictures of them towards July. And I did get a harvest this first year. Flash forward to the next year, 2016. I was really concerned. I didn't know necessarily, you know, I'm a decent gardener, but I didn't know what would the winter cycle be like? Would they get too cold? They don't have the thermal mass of the earth to protect them. Hops do need a period of dormancy before they'll come back. And this was about early April, and they came back. As you can see here, there's a definitive settling of the potting mix. So, you know, you will need to add some more there. This is right before I thinned the herd here. I've heard you want to keep maybe 3-4 vines. And so that allows all the energy to go into those as opposed to these little ones. You know, they're all competing for the same resource. So that was early April, and this is mid-May here, and as you can see, I trimmed them down, I thinned out the herd, I put some black plastic on, kind of keep that light out and maybe encourage a little bit more growth, and they're doing phenomenal. Really nice. And up and away they go. So I'm looking forward to a really good second year yield.